Well, there for a moment, I was wondering who's going to come up and preach this. If you saw the title in the bulletin, the sermon that the pastor cannot preach. Clayton, I'm glad you're back. Welcome back. And I don't feel alone in that regard. So that there is someone else who can pick this up if I can't make it through. This is not an easy thing to preach about, this passage in Hebrews. Now, this is Trinity Sunday. That's why the white banners are hanging today. It's a recognition of God the Father and God the Son, God the Holy Spirit being with us. And if you have looked through your years at the way in which this has possibly been shown in artistic form, there's an icon that shows that, I believe it's Rublev's icon, the three persons of the Trinity around a table where you really can't tell that one is above the other. They just seem to all be in harmony with one another. And that seems to be what we have been left with. Can we model that kind of harmony? Can we show that kind of love for each other? And Jesus, why didn't you stay here and be our leader? Why did you leave and expect us to be able to figure this out? But Jesus said, if I leave, the Holy Spirit will come and will guide you. And that's part of what this message is about, is how do we work at that relationship together? The writer of Hebrews just almost seems to be coming at us with these imperative sentences, almost like the paper's kind of being pulled away from the writer and like, okay, these are the last things I need to get in. So, keep loving each other, entertain strangers, remember that those that are in prison, that are suffering, be faithful to your partner, honor marriage, don't love money, be content, and remember God's never going to leave you, never going to forsake you, and by the way, obey your leaders. Heston Mennonite, I think, is at a very exciting time. There's a lot that is coming. You have a pastor who's coming in August sometime, Jess Engel. And I talked to him for about 12 minutes this week. But that was long enough to know this is going to weave together well, I believe. And we have the work that KipCor is doing with the reference team. You have a search committee that continues to seek the pastor of congregational life position. You have a visitation ministry that is going to meet together and try to shape that on Tuesday evening. There's a lot of things happening that are coming together, I think, at a really, really good time. I've been walking with you for about 8 months. I've noticed that when I've gone to congregations that it seems like somewhere about 6 months I start to get protective of the church. Now, I liked you before I came. So you had an advantage when I came in. And I have grown to love this congregation. And this message is one that in some ways I would like to preach my very last Sunday and be out the door. It's really difficult for a pastor who's present to talk about what I want to talk about today. But I want you to know that this is coming from somebody that cares deeply about you, somebody who sees those things coming together that I think will come together in a really great way. And I'm going to feel even better about that if we can pull together what I want to share with you about Hebrews chapter 13. Before we get into that, I want to begin with a basic truth. I believe that each one of you has been created in the image of God. Michelle has preached that. Clayton has preached that. I have preached that. We've been trying to grind that into you. Sorry. Been trying to make sure you know you are God's beloved. 1 John 3:1 says, "See what love the Father has given us that we should be called children of God. And then it does this exclamation, and that is what we are. That is so cool. To be called the sons and daughters of God. What love the Father has given us. There's implications to that, and that's where I want to go. That if that is true, if we believe that of one another, then there's three characteristics that I think are true of how we engage each other in relationship. The first one being respect. That I will treat you with respect for no other reason than because you are worthy of that dignity because you are created in God's image. And I will engage you with a sense of humility. And this is not a humility that's about somehow trying to push down who I am or what I've done, or it has nothing to do with that. It's a humility that recognizes, I don't know everything about you. My knowledge has limits. And the last one is to engage each other with a sense of wonder. You're the children of God. That means that God is at work in you. What is God doing in you and among you? Respect, humility, and a sense of wonder. Now let's start getting into some of the characteristics of those characteristics. And the first one is, it's easy at first. I have a picture I want to show you. Meet Owen Paul, Taylor and Landon Unruh's newborn little boy. I don't have any trouble respecting this little boy. I have no trouble realizing I don't know everything about who Owen is. And I have a huge amount of wondering what God is going to do in the life of this little boy. It is easy right at first. And it's very natural. It's almost like it grounds us in that idea of us being created in God's image. It's intimate, and it's easy to go there. But somewhere along the way, we become a group of adults and sometimes don't find that so easy. I would guess that every one of us, certainly most of us, could think of somebody to put in that picture where we would think, respect? They don't deserve respect. You don't think I know everything about him? Oh, I know a lot of stories. And to have a sense of wonder? I haven't seen anything wonderful yet. It isn't always easy. So when I talk about all of these very good things that are going on, and as you look into the future, I really want to encourage you to hold this message today to think about how you will engage as you go forward. No matter what the structure looks like, because that's another thing that's happening, is I'm pulling together some people to look at the Constitution so that this structure empowers the church and doesn't confuse it or hold it back, or maybe to make it more relevant. But it doesn't really matter about the structure. It doesn't matter how you organize yourselves if you don't ground yourselves in those core characteristics of respect, humility, and having that sense of wonder. So let's go into Hebrews 13 for just a bit. It feels in a way like I began my role as a pastor here 17 years ago when I graduated from the Pastoral Ministries program. I know it was over there, somewhere in the community center where it actually happened. But this was placed on me. A stole. I don't know what that means to you. What does that mean when your pastor puts that stole on? By the way, if this doesn't match, I'm sorry. I was on the phone with Luann, and she said, wear this white shirt with those pants and that tie. And if I got that wrong, I'm sorry too. But I didn't tell her I was going to wear this. But that's where this came from. That day of being sort of like a first step of credentialing toward becoming a pastor. Now listen to the words of Hebrews 13:17. They did not use this verse at my commissioning or commencement. Obey your leaders and submit to them. Why not? I mean, that would make life a lot easier. Obey your leaders and submit to them, for they are keeping watch over your souls and will give an account. Let them do this with joy and not with sighing, for that would be harmful to you. Boy, if we could just take that one verse. When you become a member here, I mean, we could use it to shape your membership vows. Like if it were me to say, yes, I, Robert, I pledge to give my gifts and talents to the congregation of Heston Mennonite, and I will obey and submit to the pastors because I want it to be a joy for them to be here. We talk about the difficulty of review processes. You don't need them. It doesn't matter. You can critique and complain and suggest. We have the final word. You just obey and submit. And it will be a joy, at least for us. And I want to say that 10 years will be long term. We'll have these super long pastorates. I'm just not sure there's going to be anybody in the pews listening to us. Because especially if you hold the idea of the Trinity up before us, that just to obey and submit to your pastors just does not feel like it's a very mutual relationship where because it just leaves no question as to who is technically kind of in charge. And it has a huge problem with it. Pastors cannot command obedience. We can't take up authority and use that without it being given to us. We can't lead if nobody's following. And I think if we could kind of parse this verse just a little bit more, it could help our understanding of it. Because the word that is in many of the translations is translated as obey does not mean obey in the sense that we often think of it. Like in Ephesians 6, verse 1, children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. So that things will go well with you. But that obedience there is different than the obedience that the Hebrew writer is using. Or in Ephesians 6:5, it says that we are to be of singleness of heart as we obey Christ. That's also different. I don't have three of them, but it was kind of like, the Sesame Street song, like three of these things are kind of the same, and one of these things is different. I can't sing the song off the top of my head right now, but I don't know does that still exist? I always liked that when I was a little kid. But you could put these scriptures for obedience together as there's three of them that are kind of the same. The other one was servants obeying your masters. But the one that's different is Hebrews. To obey your leaders and submit to them, it's different. Let me show you how it is different. If we looked at Galatians 5, verses 7 through 10, this word is used 3 times, and it's translated differently each time. But it will give you an idea of kind of the context of this word. Paul is writing, saying, "You were running well. Who prevented you from obeying the truth?" Such persuasion, same word, does not come from the one who calls you. A little yeast leavens the whole batch of dough. I am confident, same word again, about you in the Lord, that you will not think otherwise. So it has the meaning of being persuaded, to be won over. It's clearly not to give blind obedience. And the persuasion is not like somebody else over here persuading you, but it comes from inside. It's a self-persuasion that I have sat here and I have listened to our leaders and I have watched their life and how they are working. I've seen how they have tried to work with us as a congregation. And you know what? It's pretty good. I'm persuaded that they are looking out for us and where God is leading us. And I will submit to their leadership. Even in the chapter that we're in Hebrews, if you go back, I think it is to verse 9, it says something there about being, being deceived by all kinds of crazy teachings that are misled. Well, who's doing that misleading? So the writer's also talking about leaders who don't necessarily have the best interest of this group at heart, maybe aren't leading the way that the congregation needs to be led. And Jesus had something very clear to say to his disciples about what leadership looks like. If you remember, and this is in Luke chapter 22, verses 24 to 27, in this section, and this is around the last conversations that Jesus is having with his disciples, they're arguing over who's going to be the greatest in the kingdom. Who's going to be that top dog, that top leader? And Jesus tells them, you're not to be like that. Don't be like the Gentiles who they compete and fight and try to gain that position as benefactor and rule over everyone else. You're not to be like that. You are to be like what you've seen in me as a servant. A table has its places of honor. And people covet those different seats, at least in this time. Maybe we don't have that as much here. But he has been one among them as the person who comes and serves the table. And that word means like the one who kicks up dust. The one who grass does not grow under their feet. That's what you're to be doing. To be looking out for the good of those that you are leading. And there's a definition that I really like, and I think I've probably said it before, that a pastor is someone who gets you to do what you don't want to do so that you can be so that you can become what you've always wanted to be. I think that's true of fathers too. Sometimes that hard thing of trying to lead our family, our children in a way that we can see where they could go, what they could be, and sometimes to them it doesn't feel like maybe we're leading them in that way, but we're trying to help discover what God's gifts are within them. So we have these two different dynamics of a leader as pastor, as a congregation, as one that the pastor serves. What I want to get across is that this is not static. It is not a pastor here and a congregation here, and it is not a congregation here and a pastor here. This is where a church is not like a business. When the pastor is up here, the pastor cannot fire his volunteers or her volunteers. We're called to model the Trinity, to work together at where God is calling us. And a congregation at times needs to say, with the pastor up here, you know what, I am confident, I am persuaded, and I will follow. There also has to be times when the pastor can be down here knowing I have to serve the congregation. And the congregation does have its time of being able to say, there's things that do bother me, and I would like to talk to you about it. But it's dynamic. And when we can get that thing going in a circle where the pastor leads and the congregation follows, and then the congregation talks about vision and where it wants to go, and you as pastor, will you help us get there? Then the pastor goes back on top and says, yes, I'll help you get there. Would you follow? Would you help me lead? When that is just humming along, it's a beautiful thing. It is like the Trinity. There is so much that I could say about how then do we foster the relationship between a congregation and its leaders, not just pastors, but leaders too. How do we foster this in between so it stays in a dynamic way, that it keeps moving and going forward? You know, Jesus gave us the command that if there is an offense or a harm, that we're supposed to go directly to that person. Can we just say that is hard to do? We know it is. But then you talk about going to a pastor. A pastor has some power, a lot of power in a congregation. You don't all get to speak up here for 20 minutes or 35. And that's heavy sometimes. I mean, that feels like a heavy responsibility. And then we can tend to get into some habits that don't respect each other. We lose a sense of humility. And we don't have much of a sense of wonder. Let me tell you how it works from the perspective of a pastor. And as I go into this, I want you to know this message triggers things for people. It's okay if anybody would ever feel the need to walk out and just think or just get away. That is okay. I want freedom for us to be able to work on things when we feel triggered. It triggers me a little bit because I'm going to tell part of my story. What I want the focus to be, though, is that we all do experience this at some time, because you are all leaders at some level, in some way, in an area of your life right now. So I had a situation one time where someone came in to my office and just said, I want to know, how are you doing with all the talk out there about you? It's like, wow, I didn't know that. It is hard to go directly. And in that moment, it felt like that came off. And this came on. It became a weight. A weight that I carried with me the rest of the day. A weight that I could try to take off at times and set it aside. But every time I came to church, it was here. And I wear this chain for all pastors who deal with that, or have. I wear this for all of the leaders who know what it's like to be misunderstood, to want to be able to do things differently, to regret how something transpired. It's very hard to go directly. And what I want to emphasize today, this morning, is that I think triangles, which we often are told to avoid, like if there's a problem between me and a person, don't go bring someone else into it, go directly to them. What I want to say is there can be such a thing as a healthy triangle, but our tendency can be to move toward an unhealthy one, where sometimes people may just be unwilling to talk about this. And so it can make you feel stuck. The chain remains. Sometimes there's cutoff and withdrawal, and the chain remains. Sometimes a letter can even be the third part of a triangle, because that letter identifies what the concern is for the person, and so it kind of stabilizes the two because there's a letter. That third part has now stabilized this a little bit more because we at least know what we're talking about, but the chain still remains. And if it is an unsigned letter, it makes the chain even heavier because it puts the leader or the pastor in a double bind. Because not only do I go to church wearing this chain, wondering what is this all about, I have no idea who to talk to about it. And even if, as a leadership group, we make a policy that we won't accept letters that aren't signed, it does not take this away. Words have power, and when they're out, they do accomplish a work, even if we want to put them off. Now, even as we want to try to embody these things of respect and humility and a sense of wonder, there's also a way in which we as pastors, we as leaders, need to remember three other things that make it much, much easier for people to come and talk to us. Don't attack, don't defend, and don't withdraw. Don't attack, don't defend, and don't withdraw. Because when that person came in and said what they did about the talk, I wanted to know, like, who in the world thinks they're justified in saying anything? They weren't, and I knew a little bit of what they were talking about. Like, you weren't there, and you don't even know what's transpired since then. That's defense. Defense doesn't work. It never works to defend ourselves in that way, because it's just about us. It's not about the in-between here and how we relate to each other on Trinity Sunday. We can have healthy triangles. And those triangles are the most healthy when we can ask the question, God, what are you inviting us to? And I want to ask you, if you ever hear Matthew 18 again, where Jesus says, if there's a harm, go directly to the person. If you don't work it out, take 2 or 3. I want you to hear that as discernment. Because I believe difference is about what is God saying to us, and if we don't come with respect and humility and a sense of wonder, we're not going to hear what God has to say. Because we're both children of God, and we're trying to figure out, what is this in here? And sometimes you need a healthy triangle to figure that out. Because it's hard to ask that question in the moment. I mean, just think of it, the intense moments that you might have with a friend or a partner. Like Luann and I remember a long time ago with our 3 little kids in the back, stopping beside the road, trying to feed the ones that was the most hungry at the time, and the baby food was in these little containers strung out on the dash, and we were arguing about something, and I was just getting upset, and I just wanted to get going again, and it was like, fine, go, slammed it into drive, took off, and all that food went right on top of Luann. And she didn't turn to me and say, what is God saying to us? We need help with that question. So there's a healthy thing in triangles that can involve perhaps a pastor sometimes, a counselor. Oh, sometimes we just need that third party to help clear our head, somebody to help us redirect our thinking ask us good questions. It can be a trusted friend. And it can be prayer. Bringing God into that triangle. They can be healthy if they point us back to that question of what do you think God is up to? Excuse me. I asked Marla Schmidt and Norma Diller if they would be willing to come up. Norma as a representative of the reference team and Marla as a representative of the elders. And I wanted to get somebody from Personnel Council too, because these are part of what I would call my healthy support sort of triangle. These are the ones that can help carry the load. If you'd want to come up, and I'm going to light one candle, and I'd like you each to also light one. Because Jesus says in Matthew 18, this phenomenal promise that where 2 or 3 of you are gathered together, I am there in the midst of you. And you've heard me say it before. He's talking about when we can't figure out this relationship. I will be there. And the Hebrew writers gives us that confidence too, that God will not fail us. God will not forsake us if we're willing to do that. So you two represent part of that support system. And one of the other phrases Jesus says that is really hard to hear, it's really hard to accept it. Whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven. And whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. Where 2 or 3 of you gather together in my name, I will be there among you. There are some great things coming in the next months for Heston Mennonite. My prayer is that every chain would be thrown off. And that we as a congregation, and you beyond the time when I am not here with you, will carry that torch of respect and humility and a sense of wonder. Amen.